January 1945, Allied headquarters in Europe. A report reaches senior command showing that frontline stability is weakening faster in units receiving no mail than in units facing supply shortages. An internal memo confirms that a non-combat battalion is exerting more influence on morale metrics than several combat formations. The data forces leadership to confront an unexpected dependence. 855 women assigned to a postal unit are now driving outcomes once shaped by ammunition flow and unit rotation. The institution designed to support them is beginning to rely on them instead. This is where assumptions start to fracture, and where overlooked decisions reshape entire fronts. Kindly like this video and subscribe so you do not miss out. The war expands across multiple regions, placing continuous pressure on every form of communication the military depends on. Dispatch centers attempt to track millions of service members, but shifting unit locations and unpredictable movements strain the system beyond its planned capacity. Mailbags accumulate in storage facilities faster than existing personnel can process them, creating delays that compound each week. Each backlog represents a break in connection between soldiers and the people who anchor their sense of stability. Logistical leadership focuses its resources on transportation networks, fuel allocation, and medical evacuation structures. Communication infrastructure receives limited support because it is categorized as non-essential to direct operations. This classification shapes policies that prioritize physical survival while neglecting the emotional structures that influence discipline and readiness. Administrators begin to realize that the absence of correspondence is generating vulnerabilities not recorded in traditional reports. Commanders notice rising cases of inattention and erratic behavior among troops who have gone long periods without receiving mail. They track patterns linking these issues to the widening communication delays. Units with consistent mail flow maintain steadier routines, while those with prolonged gaps show higher incidence of conflict and reduced cooperation. The connection between communication breakdowns and military performance becomes difficult to ignore. Families at home face growing uncertainty as letters fail to arrive. They interpret silence as potential loss, which heightens public anxiety and places additional pressure on governmental institutions. Mailrooms across the nation receive pleas for information they cannot provide, further revealing the system's inability to manage expectations during prolonged conflict. The emotional weight carried by civilians feeds into broader concerns about wartime transparency. By this stage, the mail distribution process sits at the intersection of two collapsing systems: the military's internal need for steady morale and the public's external need for reassurance. Officials recognize that the communication network can no longer function under existing staffing and procedures. The problem begins to threaten recruitment stability and long-term morale sustainability across several theaters of war. As strategic planners examine the growing crisis, they acknowledge the need for a specialized group capable of restoring order to the disrupted system. The proposal gaining traction requires personnel who can operate with precision, endurance, and adaptation under pressure. The suggestion challenges traditional expectations regarding who should fill such roles. The proposed solution will break assumptions the institution has relied on since the beginning of the war. The volume of wartime correspondence rises at a pace no department had anticipated. Letters arrive from every direction as mobilization expands, each one requiring identification, routing, and verification before it can move further. Storage facilities record surges that exceed previous records by wide margins, forcing clerks to stack incoming mail in temporary holding areas that soon overflow. The system that once functioned with predictable workload cycles now faces demands that outstrip its foundational structure. Traditional workflows remain rooted in pre-war assumptions about troop stability and fixed unit locations. These assumptions collapse as divisions shift positions with little warning. Routing procedures designed for stable deployments cannot adapt to rapid relocations, causing misdirected mail and repeated processing cycles. Personnel attempt to compensate by extending work periods, yet each extension produces minimal progress because the core procedures remain inefficient under wartime conditions. The delays stretch from weeks to months, creating a cycle that reinforces itself. Reports from multiple commands link these delays to changes in soldier behavior. Troops deprived of correspondence show increased irritability and diminished focus during routine operations. Training officers describe recurring lapses in concentration among recruits who wait for updates from home without receiving any. Experienced personnel begin to misinterpret silence from family as signs of crisis, affecting their judgment during tasks that require steady attention. Leadership recognizes that the communication backlog has become a destabilizing force. War departments attempt to modernize the system by introducing new mechanical equipment and revised distribution charts. These efforts fail because the underlying issue is not machinery but unpredictability. Units continually shift in response to battlefield developments, invalidating routing plans before they can be implemented. Every attempted reorganization collapses under the weight of rapid change. Administrators express frustration as each strategy proves inadequate within days of deployment. Officials begin evaluating broader consequences. The communication failure weakens recruitment efforts because potential volunteers hear reports of families losing contact with deployed relatives. Training centers experience declining morale among new arrivals who worry about their ability to stay connected once relocated. Operational planners note rising error rates tied to emotional strain within combat units. The overall picture reveals a systematic weakening of readiness linked directly to the mail backlog. As the scale of the problem becomes undeniable, senior leaders acknowledge that traditional staffing will not solve it. The workload requires personnel capable of sustained precision under shifting conditions. It also requires individuals able to reorganize processes without relying on outdated assumptions about deployment patterns. Departments begin assessing which groups within the military possess the necessary discipline and adaptability to confront the crisis. Through internal discussions, it becomes clear that the only viable answer lies outside the standard pool of logistics personnel. The task demands an unconventional workforce whose abilities have not been leveraged at this scale before. As undelivered letters accumulate in storage facilities, soldiers begin to feel the consequences in ways the system never accounted for. They attempt to maintain routine focus, but the absence of updates from home disrupts their ability to concentrate on essential tasks. The uncertainty grows with each passing week, creating strain that affects unit performance across multiple fronts. Supervisors note that the decline is not tied to physical exhaustion but to the unresolved questions soldiers carry with them into every assignment. Entire groups begin to show patterns of distraction during training and deployment preparations. Instructors observe repeated mistakes from individuals who previously demonstrated consistent reliability. These errors occur not because of unfamiliar procedures but because minds remain occupied with unanswered concerns. Troops who once approached assignments with confidence start hesitating during decision-making moments, and these pauses introduce risks into activities that require absolute precision. Families at home struggle with increasing anxiety as weeks pass without receiving correspondence. Many interpret the silence as evidence of injury or loss, and this belief shapes long-term emotional outcomes. Some write repeatedly to the same address, unaware that their letters join the growing backlog. Others contact local officials seeking information, placing pressure on administrators already overwhelmed by wartime responsibilities. The emotional burden borne by families becomes a second front of instability. Public trust in the military's communication processes begins to erode. Newspapers report on delays without fully understanding the scale of the backlog, and speculation replaces clarity. Rumors circulate through communities, further stressing families who have no reliable source of information. Recruitment officers encounter reluctance from individuals hesitant to serve if it means losing contact with the people who support them. The communication crisis extends beyond the battlefield into the social fabric that sustains the war effort. Commanders face rising complications as the emotional strain begins to influence daily operations. Decision-making within units slows as personnel attempt to balance duties with unspoken concerns. Reports of avoidable mistakes increase, prompting internal reviews that point not to lack of training but to weakened emotional grounding. Even experienced officers struggle to maintain discipline among troops who feel cut off from their families. The system built to reinforce structure now suffers from a breakdown in the most basic form of connection. Medical officers record elevated cases of stress-related conditions among soldiers awaiting correspondence. Many request updates from clerks who have no information beyond confirmation that delays are widespread. These encounters reveal the depth of the crisis and show how the absence of communication shapes physical health in ways not captured by formal assessments. The strain affects recovery times, concentration, and overall readiness. The backlog becomes more than an inconvenience. It becomes a widespread destabilizer. Within the military's administrative branches, concerns grow quietly. Leadership recognizes that the emotional consequences of the communication collapse cannot be measured through traditional metrics. Reports highlight the emerging link between delayed correspondence and deteriorating morale, but placing emotional impact into operational terms proves difficult. Some officials attempt to frame the issue as a matter of efficiency, while others argue it represents a moral responsibility the institution is failing to meet. Both perspectives acknowledge the severity of the crisis. Across multiple theaters, battalions experience measurable declines in discipline. Minor disputes escalate quickly as unresolved personal concerns influence reactions among troops. Officers intervene more frequently to settle conflicts, stretching leadership resources already under pressure. These disruptions accumulate, disrupting planning cycles and reducing the predictability essential for coordinated operations. The breakdown reflects not a lack of commitment from soldiers but the cumulative weight of silence from home. The absence of correspondence also shapes long-term outcomes. Families who believe their letters were ignored carry resentment that extends beyond the war. Soldiers who feel abandoned by the system struggle to rebuild trust even after returning home. The emotional distance created by months without communication becomes a legacy that persists far beyond the battlefield. These consequences affect households, communities, and veterans' eventual adjustment. Gradually, leadership begins to acknowledge the moral implications of the crisis. Although logistical challenges remain the official explanation, internal discussions recognize that the institution is failing in its responsibility to maintain the emotional link between soldiers and their families. This recognition emerges not from policy reviews but from the cumulative stories of individuals affected by silence. Leaders understand that continued neglect will worsen every existing strain. The backlog becomes an unseen contributor to casualties. Troops entering high-risk situations without emotional grounding make decisions influenced by uncertainty. Families left without clarity endure prolonged stress that shapes health and stability. Communities absorb the ripple effects as anxiety becomes a shared burden. The lack of correspondence creates a chain of consequences that reaches far beyond the physical envelopes sitting in storage. The toll becomes impossible to ignore, forcing leadership toward a solution that challenges long-standing expectations and demands a departure from conventional staffing assumptions. Moments shaped by consequences like these remind viewers why hidden turning points deserve close attention. As the communication crisis deepens, military authorities begin a series of internal debates that reveal how unprepared the institution is for the scale of the problem. The existing system cannot recover on its own, yet the proposed solution forces leadership to confront long-standing norms. Deploying women to frontline-adjacent zones conflicts with conventional expectations regarding who should serve in those environments. This tension shapes every discussion, as officials weigh the necessity of action against the boundaries of tradition. Committees assemble to evaluate the risks associated with sending women into areas affected by wartime instability. They examine issues involving security classifications, transportation demands, and the possibility that women could face dangers previously reserved for combat units. The assessment uncovers gaps in policy, forcing administrators to consider how the presence of women in these roles would interact with existing regulations. Ethical questions arise about whether the institution can protect them adequately while relying on their labor to restore a failing system. Some leaders argue that without decisive intervention, the communication collapse will continue to undermine operational performance and emotional stability among troops. They present data showing rising incidents linked to the backlog and emphasize the long-term consequences if families remain disconnected from their deployed relatives. Their stance frames the situation as a matter of responsibility, asserting that restoring correspondence is essential for maintaining both morale and public support. They warn that inaction would lead to broader instability across multiple departments. Opposing voices raise concerns about the political ramifications of introducing women into these assignments. They predict backlash from segments of the public who believe such roles fall outside traditional expectations. Critics also fear that if the initiative fails, the blame will extend beyond the logistics division to broader wartime leadership. These officials caution that the government cannot afford controversy during a period when unity is essential for sustaining the war effort. Their argument focuses on protecting institutional reputation rather than addressing functional needs. As discussions continue, the divide becomes more pronounced. The institution faces a choice between adhering to convention or addressing a crisis that grows more destructive each day. Leaders increasingly acknowledge that the consequences of maintaining the status quo outweigh the risks associated with change. Reports show that soldiers' performance continues to deteriorate and that families are losing confidence in the military's ability to safeguard basic communication. The situation forces decision-makers to reconsider what their responsibilities truly entail. The pressure mounts when projections indicate that the backlog will soon overwhelm remaining processing centers entirely. At that point, even emergency measures would fail to restore order. This realization shifts the tone of the debate. The question is no longer whether women should be deployed but what will happen if they are not. The crisis leaves little room for partial solutions. The institution must choose between adapting or accepting outcomes that compromise operational readiness at its core. Gradually, resistance weakens as the severity of the situation becomes undeniable. Senior officials who previously opposed the proposal begin to accept that preserving tradition cannot come at the cost of widespread instability. Reports from field units confirm that morale continues to erode, and leadership acknowledges that emotional strain has become as consequential as material shortages. These findings lay the groundwork for a decision that would have been unthinkable at the start of the conflict. Eventually, the urgency of the communications collapse overrides all lingering hesitation. A final assessment identifies the Women's Army Corps as the group with the discipline, organizational ability, and resilience required to confront the crisis. From within this corps, 855 women are selected for assignment to a newly formed postal battalion with the sole mission of reversing the communication breakdown. The choice marks a significant departure from existing norms and signals a turning point in how the military allocates responsibility. Their assignment is approved, but uncertainty remains. Leadership cannot predict how the system will respond to this unconventional solution. They do not know whether the women will be accepted by existing structures or whether the scale of the communication crisis is even solvable. The decision sets events in motion that will soon test every assumption the institution has relied upon. When the newly formed postal battalion arrives at its assignment, the scale of the crisis becomes immediately clear. Storage spaces contain millions of unsorted letters, each representing a stalled connection between soldiers and their families. Existing staff provide only basic orientation, leaving the women to assess the situation through records, workflows, and incomplete routing charts. The battalion recognizes that the inherited system cannot recover through incremental adjustments. A full restructuring is the only viable path forward. They begin by examining every step of the existing process. Standard military categorization proves insufficient for the volume and variability of wartime correspondence, so they design a new structure centered on regiment identification, rotation cycles, and unit movement history. By tracking patterns in troop deployment, they create a method for predicting where soldiers are likely to be when their mail arrives. This approach reduces misrouting and eliminates repetitive processing that previously consumed valuable time. Once the categorization framework is established, the battalion reorganizes the workflow itself. They remove outdated procedures that slowed sorting and introduce a sequence of tasks designed to minimize unnecessary handling. The changes require strict discipline and consistency, which the unit maintains through coordinated scheduling and constant review of emerging obstacles. Every adjustment they implement aims to reduce bottlenecks and increase throughput without sacrificing accuracy. Their new model begins producing measurable improvements. Mail that previously required multiple processing cycles passes through the system with far fewer delays. The battalion documents each refinement, ensuring that successful methods can be replicated quickly as the workload shifts. The operation becomes increasingly efficient as the women refine their approach, integrating new data from field reports and updating routing expectations based on active troop movements. Despite the transformative results, military leadership keeps their progress unpublicized. Officials fear that acknowledging the battalion's impact may spark controversy among those who oppose their deployment. Administrators also worry that public attention could draw scrutiny to the earlier failures that created the backlog. As a result, the women continue their work without recognition, focusing entirely on stabilizing the communication network that the military depends on. Internal reports show that the redesigned system now operates faster than any prior wartime mail unit. The battalion's precision and adaptability enable it to handle fluctuations that had previously halted progress. Their work creates a foundation capable of absorbing even heavier loads, but no one can predict how soon that capacity will be tested. Their innovations will soon face extreme operational pressure that threatens to exceed every improvement they have made. The battalion's progress faces an abrupt threat when a massive surge of mail arrives in the aftermath of a major military movement. The new volume exceeds even the expanded capacity built through months of restructuring. Letters intended for thousands of shifting units arrive simultaneously, creating a load that challenges every improvement the women have established. The battalion understands that any slowdown will allow the backlog to rebuild at a speed the system cannot withstand. They immediately adjust their operations. Work cycles extend far beyond standard limits, and personnel rotate tasks to maintain accuracy under strain. The women reorganize priorities, ensuring that correspondence tied to active deployments moves first while secondary categories follow newly established emergency routing rules. They introduce rapid review checkpoints to identify misrouted items before they re-enter the system, preventing the kind of repeated sorting that previously clogged the entire operation. Each adjustment is designed to prevent the collapse of progress earned through difficult changes. Leadership monitors the situation with increasing concern. Reports show that any significant delay will undermine morale in multiple theaters simultaneously. Officers responsible for oversight compare real-time data against established capacity projections and recognize that the battalion is operating at the edge of feasibility. No other unit is prepared to assume control if the system falters, leaving the women solely responsible for stabilizing communication during a critical moment. Despite the pressure, the battalion continues refining its procedures in real time. Each hour brings new challenges as shifting unit locations complicate routing predictions. The women adapt by updating deployment patterns daily, integrating information from field reports into their sorting decisions. Their approach prevents errors from multiplying, but the margin between success and failure remains narrow. Their success or failure in this moment will determine whether the battalion becomes indispensable or disposable. Moments when entire systems hinge on unrecognized labor remind viewers why these turning points matter. The emergency protocols hold, and the battalion's redesigned system absorbs the surge that threatened to overturn months of progress. The successful handling of unprecedented volume demonstrates that the new structure is not merely an improvement but a model capable of sustaining pressures no previous wartime male unit had managed. Internal reports confirm that routing accuracy remains stable even under extreme load, proving the viability of the women's methods. As correspondence reaches units with renewed consistency, soldiers across multiple regions experience a noticeable shift in emotional stability. Reports from field officers indicate fewer instances of distracted behavior and a decline in performance lapses linked to personal uncertainty. Units with previously declining morale show measurable recovery as communication channels re-establish the connection between frontline personnel and their support networks at home. Commanders track improvements in operational coordination that coincide with the restored mail flow. Briefings highlight smoother transitions during deployments and fewer disruptions tied to disciplinary issues. The restored correspondence provides troops with the reassurance necessary to maintain focus during high-pressure assignments, increasing reliability across several divisions simultaneously. On the home front, families receiving delayed letters regain confidence in the system. Communities that had begun to question the military's ability to manage communication now recognize a shift toward consistency. This improvement stabilizes public sentiment and reduces the volume of requests submitted to administrative offices seeking information about missing correspondence. The battalion's effectiveness begins influencing decision-making in departments unrelated to mail distribution. Planners studying their methods note the value of predictive routing, workflow restructuring, and rapid response protocols. Their approach becomes a reference point for committees tasked with improving supply allocation, personnel records management, and transportation scheduling. The system benefiting from their work is about to recognize its dependence in an unexpected way. Stories shaped by unseen labor encourage viewers to reflect on contributions that quietly alter the course of events. As the battalion's success becomes evident within internal channels, opposing forces take notice in indirect ways. Enemy propagandists attempt to frame the presence of women near operational zones as a sign of Allied desperation, but their efforts falter because accurate information is tightly controlled. With no verifiable details to manipulate, their narratives fail to gain traction. The absence of public data limits their ability to create meaningful disruption, leaving them unable to exploit the development for psychological advantage. Within Allied command, the situation evolves rapidly. Reports from multiple theaters show measurable improvements in performance that correspond directly to stabilized communication. Senior leaders begin regarding the battalion's achievements as strategically significant rather than administrative. Their work is recognized not only for resolving the backlog but for reinforcing the emotional foundation that keeps units cohesive under extreme pressure. The battalion shifts from a logistical experiment to a critical component of wartime readiness. Other departments observe the transformation and begin requesting guidance from the battalion's leadership. Supply chain managers seek advice on predictive scheduling to match fluctuating needs in combat zones. Intelligence officials study the battalion's workflow reorganization to improve the handling of captured documents and field reports. Personnel divisions request templates for tracking movement patterns to reduce errors during large-scale redeployments. The influence of the battalion's methods expands beyond mail distribution, reshaping expectations about what efficient wartime administration can achieve. Not all reactions are supportive. Some units express resentment as the women's efficiency highlights weaknesses in long-standing command structures. Officers accustomed to traditional hierarchies feel overshadowed by a battalion that was never intended to redefine operational norms. Quiet resistance emerges from those who believe the success of the unit challenges established assumptions about who should be trusted with vital responsibilities. These tensions remain largely unspoken but influence internal dynamics. Ironically, the Army becomes increasingly dependent on a unit originally viewed as temporary. What began as an emergency deployment evolves into a central pillar of communication stability. Commanders grow reliant on the consistent flow of correspondence to maintain troop morale, and any disruption in the battalion's output is now treated as a strategic concern. The system, built on long-standing conventions, shifts in response to a team that had once been seen as peripheral. Security divisions recognize the rising importance of the battalion and introduce new restrictions around postal operations. They tighten protocols governing access to routing data, mail storage zones, and transportation schedules. These changes aim to protect the system from espionage or infiltration, acknowledging that the correspondence network has become a target with strategic implications. Increased oversight also reflects the military's recognition that the battalion's performance directly influences morale across multiple fronts. As various departments adjust to the battalion's growing impact, senior leadership faces a new choice. They must determine whether to formally acknowledge the unit's central role in stabilizing communication or allow their contributions to remain largely unseen to avoid political controversy. Their decision will shape not only the battalion's future but the institutional memory of the war's administrative backbone. The battalion completes its mission with a record unmatched by any wartime postal operation. Their sustained discipline keeps the communication network functioning during the most unstable periods of the conflict. Each system they created holds under pressure, confirming that the decision to deploy them had reshaped the military's understanding of what reliable logistics required. Their workload does not decrease as the war progresses, yet their output remains consistent, proving that their methods are capable of carrying demands beyond what any planning committee had predicted. By the end of their deployment, more than 17 million letters have moved through their hands. Every item processed represents a connection restored between those serving abroad and those waiting at home. Soldiers who once operated under the weight of silence regain emotional stability, and families who feared the worst receive long-delayed reassurance. The battalion becomes the unseen link that holds thousands of relationships intact during a period defined by separation and uncertainty. Their efforts influence readiness across several theaters, as commanders note improved cooperation and steadier performance among units once disrupted by the communication collapse. Post-war evaluations examine the battalion's data and conclude that their work played a direct role in sustaining cohesion among deployed personnel. Analysts studying disciplinary records, performance reports, and morale indicators identify measurable shifts corresponding to periods when the battalion reached peak efficiency. Although the findings circulate quietly, they establish the foundation for future decisions regarding the role of women in logistics, intelligence, and administrative operations. The battalion's performance demonstrates that reliability and precision can carry strategic weight equal to equipment or manpower. Despite their measurable impact, formal recognition never fully reflects the scale of their contribution. Many of their accomplishments remain embedded in internal reports rather than public accounts. Official histories reference their presence but rarely convey how significantly they altered the course of wartime communication. Their achievements remain known primarily to those who relied on their work or studied the underlying systems they repaired. The battalion completes its service with dignity, leaving behind a record that required resilience, structure, and unwavering commitment. Their legacy becomes something later generations must rediscover, revealing how critical their actions were to maintaining stability during one of history's most demanding conflicts. The battalion's story demonstrates how roles often considered peripheral can shape the direction of large systems. Their work shows that outcomes in war do not rely solely on moments of confrontation but also on the reliability of the structures that support those who serve. By restoring communication, they sustain the emotional framework on which discipline, confidence, and operational focus depend. Their contribution underscores how stability in one domain can influence success across many others. Their experience illustrates that logistical reliability carries consequences equal to any tactical decision. Each accurately delivered letter altered the conditions under which soldiers trained, planned, and acted. The cumulative effect of their labor created an environment in which individuals could regain clarity and remain connected to the world they fought to protect. This stability shaped decisions made on distant fronts, confirming that effectiveness often emerges from acts that appear routine yet influence entire networks. The battalion's service reflects a broader truth about responsibility during crisis. Actions that maintain continuity can prevent long-term damage, even when they receive little acknowledgement. Their commitment reveals how duty extends beyond visible accomplishments, encompassing every task that preserves the well-being of others. The story shows how unseen labor can steady institutions under extreme strain. Their experience also speaks to the universal need for connection. During periods of uncertainty, people rely on communication to sustain identity, purpose, and resolve. By restoring these connections, the battalion reminded both soldiers and civilians that they remained part of a shared effort, even when distance and danger separated them. Their work strengthened relationships and reinforced the emotional frameworks that guide human endurance. The relevance of their service extends far past the era in which they lived. It offers a reminder that contributions rarely documented can influence the direction of events in ways not immediately visible. Their actions stand as evidence that the integrity of a system often depends on those who work without recognition, sustaining others through steady perseverance. The story of these 855 women reflects the strength required to uphold a system many assumed would function without them. Their discipline restored links that held families together and supported soldiers who faced the demands of war. Their service stands as a reminder that stability often depends on individuals whose work remains uncelebrated but essential. If stories like this resonate, and if uncovering the hidden foundations of history matters to you, your support helps ensure that these accounts continue to be told with care and accuracy. This is Battlefront Insider, where we reveal the human stories behind every war.